Thank you all for having me. I hope you can hear me okay. Can you? Everybody? Um, I always like to know who my audience is. I do a lot of talks for clinicians and people in the corporate world who are interested in sort of the treatment field. But where I first started giving talks was literally to crowds just like you guys who are of the same sort of cloth as me, which is that spirituality is the center of your lives. So I feel, at least a lot of you here I know are like that. So I feel a kinship with you, and but I also know that the audience tonight is very diverse. There's all sorts of people here with different backgrounds and levels of experience. So what I'm going to try to do is, the work that we do is a very sort of extensive system of inquiry that we do at the Kiloby Center and that I do, and the facilitators that I've trained or we've trained. There's about 100 of them all over the world. It's a pretty, it's more of like an art than a science. So it's creative inquiry in the sense that new tools are being developed constantly. It's an ongoing organic thing, so that it never becomes stale, and so that it's relevant to modern life, if that makes sense. So how did I get here? I, I, I told the story today, and I'll try to tell it again in a different way for those who are hearing it the second time. When I was a kid, I felt like I didn't belong here on the earth. I felt like, and I didn't have words for it, but I felt as if I was just not part of you all. And I guess a lot of people felt that way. And it's very common now that I've worked with people. I know that we all kind of grow up in some level that way. I also grew up gay. I didn't know that I was gay in 5th and 6th grade, but I also knew there was something different about me. I felt a feminine quality within me and not just male energy. I felt both energies within me. So as a result of that, the male friends in my peer group didn't know how to handle that. They didn't like the female energy in me, the creative energy that was coming out, and so they bullied me. These were my closest friends in 6th grade. Bullied me to the point that I was petrified and stayed home from school for 3 months. I now know that's PTSD that developed as a result of that, but I didn't know that then. All I knew back then, and all really kids know when they're going through that, is something terrifying is happening, and how can I get safe, basically. So how I got safe was not only to stay home from school, but to start a long process of being addicted to anything that I could get my hands on that made me feel comfortable and safe. So I spent 20 years in active addiction. Literally, I say addicted to anything. People say, what? I say, well, what do you have, you know? And that's how I lived my life. Everything but heroin, because I didn't like needles. So I was the kind of addict, I guess you could say, who would swallow handfuls of painkillers at a time. Just swallow them, wait a few hours, swallow more. And I'm talking 10 painkillers, high-level painkillers. I'm very lucky to be alive, actually. I would use so hard that my skin would turn yellow. I would regurgitate over and over and over, and then just put more drugs in my body. That's how bad it got. I would actually literally I would put my drugs in a fireproof safe to try to keep myself from using, and then I would mail the key to myself so that I couldn't have access to the drugs for 2 days. Or I would throw the key in a lake so that I couldn't, and then I would try to figure out how to get into the lake to find the key. So this is the kind of craziness that I lived with for 20 years. So all of that culminated, along the way I somehow went to law school, graduated law school, became an attorney. The worst years of my addiction were the first 3 years of practicing law. But I was a hider, so I was a high-level, high-functioning addict. So by day, I appeared one way, and at night, I appeared another way, or you wouldn't see me for 3 or 4 days, and that's me binging, okay? So eventually, all of this has to come to a head. You can't live a life like this without eventually it taking its toll. And the way that it took its toll on me is I opened my drawer one day, and there was, I think, 1 pill there, and I thought, there's no way that that's going to get me high, and also, there's not enough in the world to give me what I really need. What I didn't know I was looking for back then was I was looking for presence. I was looking for awakening. But I was going about it like so many of us do by reaching outside myself and never finding it. So I would swallow it. So I knew in that moment there was a real come to Jesus moment in that moment, knowing that I didn't know where I was going to go or what I was going to do, but that was not going to work anymore. And so when you get to that, so then I started literally rocking like an infant on my couch, just not knowing what to do. And some really wonderful people came and sort of picked me up and essentially saved my life. What I found out is under that, that as soon as I took the drugs and alcohol away, I became this fierce spiritual seeker. I don't know where it came from. Nobody in my family really had it, but somehow it got a hold of me and it wouldn't let go. And so I used to say I didn't read books, I would eat them, as a way of trying to explain just how serious I was about seeking enlightenment. I lived, ate, and breathed it in the functioning world. So I was actually engaging in a very, very extensive mindfulness practice while practicing law and while doing the daily activities of life. So what I did for myself, just so you understand, when I became a fierce spiritual seeker, I looked all over the world for the answer to the question of how does one end suffering and who am I? And I stumbled upon some awakened teachers that really spoke to me very directly and said, essentially, everything you've come to believe about yourself is false. You're not any of those things that you believe. You are this awakeness that's already here. So when I heard that, it instantly I knew that it was more than intellectual truth. I knew that it was there was a deep truth in that. But I couldn't articulate why I knew that. It was almost like my soul or something very, very ancient in me woke up and recognized the words in that book, even though I didn't understand what was being said. So that started a very fierce practice of living in the world and learning how to be from awareness, to look and experience life from presence, from awareness, and to observe and inquire into the thoughts and the feelings that were coming up just in daily life. And I got more and more skillful at it. So I studied it more and more and practiced it more and more and developed skills that I felt were working for me. And then some very powerful experiences happened, like so many of you who've had experiences. One of the first experiences was, driving in a car. And for about a week and a half before this experience, I'd had almost like a ball in my chest because I'd been resting in my heart for a long time as part of the practice, just resting my attention in my heart area throughout the day as often as possible. What I think happened is that energy just started to sort of concretize into this contracted feeling, but it was actually sort of half painful and half euphoric, the ball of energy. But I was driving that day, and then all of a sudden it's like the ball melted, and it's like all of reality felt like it melted. It felt like when that melted, the whole thing melted, the whole thing that I knew. But it was a very, very brief experience. It was almost like a peak experience. There were several other experiences like that, but the big one was lying in bed one night. It was in July. I had just come home from a 12-step retreat, and I had been in the practice of present moment awareness again for a long time. And it was that night I was literally tracing surfaces with awareness and noticing that there's no gap anywhere in the universe. Like something will just meet another thing, and then that meets the other thing, and there's no gap anywhere. And just noticing that, and noticing that it's only thoughts that make it seem like those things are separate. Like it's only a thought that says, that's a floor, and this is a platform, and this is a wall. So I started to look more and more without thought and really inquiring into my thoughts. And then I had the experience of while petting my dogs of not being separate from them. And then walking around my apartment laughing, absolutely probably looked silly as could be, laughing and literally scraping the carpet. I was laughing so hard at the idea of separation because the entire thing fell away. And it was like seeing that you think that there's just this reality that exists out here as it is, and then suddenly something happens and you recognize that's not what's going on at all. and what's going on is not much, really, when you get quiet. It's really just this, and that was the experience of just this. When I say just this, I mean just the experience of being. When the mind is quiet, it's just the experience of being. And it's not even an experience of being really a person. It's just being. Because person is part of that construct that was being inquired into. Scott, the Scott character. So when that Scott character lifted, the laughter was not just from that feeling, that deep sense of non-separation, that there's no, that's where all the love was that night. It was just like, well, there isn't any separation, and the whole story of Scott isn't real. So that experience stuck with me, and the very, very, very deep and unconditional love that came with it. So when I say unconditional love, it's like love for no reason. It's just like love emanating for no reason, and you can't find a cause, and you can't even find an object for it. It's just there. And I remember thinking, wow, this is almost too much, and thinking, I think I want to crawl back into the ego a little bit because it felt so overwhelming, but also so beautiful. And then what I did is I started to function in life from this place and trying to, how does one live from this? And then not just living in a quiet house, meditating, but how does one live in the company of others? How does one engage in the world from this place? And that started the development of what has become the living inquiries. So the living inquiries are sort of post-awakening development by me and the facilitators that we work with to try to really help people untangle, as the title says, the thoughts and feelings and sensations that make up suffering. So as we got more and more skillful with it, we just started to develop these inquiries. I'm going to give you a little taste of it tonight, but I can tell you that if you really want to go deep with it, come Thursday to my workshop, because we have more time, and I'm going to focus on really instructing how to do the inquiry. But I'll give you a little bit of taste of it tonight. But anyway, my life has been since then totally different. I left the practice of law and wrote 6 books in 6 years. The 6th book was about addiction. They were all written from the perspective of the awareness that was now awake to itself, and trying to explain to other people what it's like to live from that place, and also then to point other people to live from that place. So what's been so beautiful about the path since that waking up experience is just the humanness of it all. I think what's so strange that I came to find out is that when I woke up, there was a feeling of transcendence. There was a feeling of like I've left the human experience. And it felt very wonderful, actually, very, very peaceful. And then somehow over time, it's like coming back into the human experience, but in a totally different way. And that's been the real juice, and it's really the message that I have to share of the later realizations that can happen as you continue to examine stuff and examine relationship, and let relationship literally wake you up even deeper, because, I started to get tattoos recently after a marriage that's ending. My husband didn't want me to get tattoos, so now I'm getting tattoos because I've always wanted them. And one of the ones I want to get is of the endless knot. Are you aware of the endless knot? It may be a Buddhist, I'm not sure if it's a Hindu symbol, but the endless knot has some really wonderful definitions, and one of them is the sense that all of life is relationship and duality, but it's there to wake us up. In other words, the duality is there to show us the falseness of what we believe about ourselves and other people. And as we see through the falseness, there's a harmonization that happens, where the separation and the disconnection leaves, and now we're relating on a much, much deeper level. So my work in recovery has been really about helping people with this feeling of separation and disconnection that addicts carry around. And so I think maybe all people carry it around, but we who use substances, it tends to be a big focal point for us. We don't feel connected in certain ways to people. It's sometimes very difficult for us to connect. Certainly was for me, and I should speak to my own experience. It came from being traumatized. You know, when the people closest to you turn on you and scare you to death as a kid, how do you connect as an adult, right? It was easier to bond with substances. It was easier to be intimate with a cigarette or a pill or a drink than it was very scary to actually try to connect with a human being. But as the recognition of awareness started to happen, then I started to see what's the root of the disconnection? What's behind it all? And I started to look at these certain issues. And one is deficiency stories. So deficiency stories are anything like, I'm not enough, so I'm not good enough, or I'm unlovable, or I'm inadequate, I'm unacknowledged, unheard, unsupported. I'm something or not something. Can we just say that? And it's an endless list. Everybody has one or two or more of them. Cross-culturally, I came to know. Doesn't matter where you live, it seems to be a part of the ego. And for those of us who are addicted, it's a real driver. Because the moment that we feel feelings of lack of self-worth, our tendency, the way that we deal with that is just to use. You know, so anything that feels uncomfortable, we use. So recovery is not only about questioning these stories, because it's not who we are. We are not people who are not good enough. We are not people who are unlovable and people who are invalid. It just feels really true because we've believed it for so long, right? It's familiar, it's an old script, and you can actually see through it. And what I mean by see through it is you can actually come to know that you're not that, and know it very, very deeply, and then watch that realization transform your life. Because if you pay attention, a great degree of suffering comes from the belief in deficiency or lack. And it's not always obvious. So for example, if I walk into a room and someone says, let's say my mother says something to me that triggers me, our tendency is to focus outward. So it's just a natural tendency of ours to point outward, to say, mom is this, mom is that. If mom would do this, I'd be okay. I wish she would stop. She always, see this? It's a blind spot, because what we're doing is we're responding to mom from a story, from a deficiency story that probably mom helped create, right? Because parents help us with that. But once we believe it, we then carry it into every room and every situation. So when I carry it into mom, what's happening there with mom, the reason that mom is ultimately triggering me is because of what I believe about myself. See, if I walk into a room and I don't have a belief in deficiency, I don't have that as an identity, it's just going to be a lot harder for you to trigger me. You see? But if I have that story, it's going to be easy for you to trigger me, especially if you're my mom, right? Right? So what I'm trying to help people see is that we're never upset for the reason that we think. It always looks like it's outside. It's always actually within. And that if you go within skillfully and you undo what I call the Velcro, which I'll talk about in a second, you undo the Velcro, which is the stickiness between the thoughts and then what you're feeling. Because that stickiness between the thoughts and the feeling is the suffering. That's the experience of suffering. If you pay attention, it's what's happening. So when you get triggered, often we're so unconscious we don't see what's happening. But if you stop and notice what's happening, and many of you do because you're doing these practices, you'll notice that in that moment of a trigger, the Velcro effect is happening. This is my language. I don't expect you to adopt it. But The Velcro effect is just the experience of thoughts feeling stuck to feeling stuck there. And it's a real layman's way of talking about it. So really, most of the work is about undoing the Velcro. Because as the Velcro gets undone, what is happening is that we're becoming more embodied. So we're coming to meet feeling directly and from awareness without the filter of thought on it through these inquiries I'm going to show you. And as you do that, what happens is you meet a feeling really directly without thought. That's how animals, I think, experience emotions and why they don't suffer like we do. Is when you start to meet a feeling directly, it's like telling the mind that it doesn't have to figure this out, right? Because if you don't feel things directly, what happens is the mind has to get busy. It has to get busy figuring out how to protect a self or defend or attack or redefine a self or analyze a self. It's like a search engine that's looking to take pain away, right? Just pay attention next time you get triggered. That's what's happening. And your mind is going like this. It's like he, him, she should have done. It's doing this because it's like you're trying to feel better, but it doesn't work. In fact, it just agitates you more. It agitates your mind. It can also bring other emotions up while you're trying to work it out. So much of this work is about learning how to feel directly, right? And just becoming embodied. Embodied means it's not just that I'm awake and aware from up here, but that my whole being is consciousness. Like my whole being is conscious. So that when a feeling arises in that consciousness, I'm aware of it the moment it's there. And I can turn my attention to it very directly without thought. And so that's one of the skills that we develop, is learning how to be with feelings and sensations without thoughts on them, which is a very direct way, and it shows you that the feeling can just come and go and not cause suffering. So undoing the Velcro effect is the basis of a lot of the work that we do, but we have like so many ways of undoing the Velcro. And that's where the creative mindfulness comes in. So I want to do a little bit for you tonight. But before we do that, I want to talk about the foundation of the work. So even though the topic tonight is about untangling these elements, and as you untangle them, what do you recognize? True self. That's what you recognize. So when you think you're a loser, and that thought is there, and the feeling is Velcroed to it, you identify as a limited, separate self that feels like a loser, and it feels true because the Velcro is there. But as you, again, let the thoughts go through the inquiry and come to meet the feeling directly without the thoughts on them, the loser identity is gone, and what's looking is the awareness in that moment, and you get a taste of what you really are in that moment. You continue to do inquiry as Velcro arises until it's stabilized in this awareness that's what we call true self in a lot of traditions. So the foundation of the work is what I call rest. It's not, I don't call it consciousness or awareness. I call it rest, just a word, because it feels that way to me. So what I mean by rest is, I don't mean physical rest. I don't mean sitting. I don't mean lying down. What I mean is being aware of being aware. And that's restful automatically, because awareness isn't trying to do anything with phenomena. That which is awake to thoughts that are coming across, the awareness when we're sitting in meditation, when that awareness is seeing thoughts, it itself is like it's just an opening that's not trying to manage or control any of those things coming over. So that's very restful. You see, that's very different than the ego state, because in the ego state, there's a constant trying to manage and control and change everything. So when you start to tap into this awareness, which everybody is tapping into somewhat during the meditation tonight, even if you don't know that's what's happening. As you tap into that more and you recognize that as the foundation of your experience, there is a restfulness in that, in the sense that it shows you, when you really, really know the present moment is your home. Like when you really know that there isn't anything else. Like you know that when you think that there's something else, it's a thought. Like when you think there's a past, you actually can see that it's a thought happening in that awareness. And the future is the same way. When you settle that deeply into that recognition, that's restful. And a lifetime of restlessness and agitation can settle through this recognition of awareness. It's very helpful for addiction, right? But it's also not the final answer in terms of addiction. Because what I came to find out is even as I recognized this restful awareness as the foundation of my experience, and it was liberating and peaceful and wonderful, just like the books say, it wasn't the end of my examination around addiction. And I find that for most people it isn't the end. And it's more like a beginning, but a beginning in a new way. And if some of you know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about awareness, right? Because you right, and some of you maybe don't, and that's the issue here with the talk. But at least hear me intellectually and trust that there is an awareness prior to thinking. There is something here that's awake and aware, and we're going to point to it a little more in a second, that's awake and aware regardless of whether there are any thoughts happening. You could say it's the felt sense of being or it's awareness, but it's like tapping it. You can only know it. You can't really know it by thinking about it. You can only know it by experiencing it directly. It's what's looking. It's what's experiencing. So once that's the foundation, that's very restful. What I found out though, that within that restful awareness, so the restful awareness is like the still pond that isn't disturbed ultimately by anything that comes across. So you can have the worst thought ever, but when you're resting in that awareness, you can rest with the thought. You can actually allow the thought. And when the thought dissolves, it shows you that the pond or the stillness is still there. So the awareness is always there. And that is really, really, really profound to realize. But it's not the end because of all the disturbances. So with addiction, so many of us who are experiencing addiction are the reason that we're not bad people. And that's the thing. It's like there's this whole thing that we're getting over in our society about addicts. Just the word itself, has a stigma. I can tell you that we're no different than anybody else. It's just that the way that we cope with suffering is different. And I actually want to try to include everybody in that term because I really want to say that addiction is not just drugs and alcohol. It's food. And Durga said it. I think it was Durga that said it. At the very bottom, it's food and people. Who said that? Was that you? Yes, certainly people, right? Because underneath it all, it's like we want approval and love, right? More than anything. And you can take away the drugs and alcohol, and you'll watch that addiction for approval and acknowledgement and attention and praise. And a lot of people just think, well, that's just part of human life. No, that's actually addiction. That's actually separation. That's actually deficiency that's doing that. Our true nature doesn't do that. Our awareness has no interest in that because it's already whole as it is. So the pond is still, as we're meditating, we're noticing that the pond is still, but disturbances come across. And the disturbances are the form of the thoughts, emotions, and sensations. Let me just show you a couple little inquiry tools that we use that you can maybe start to employ, in the next few days. And then hopefully you'll come to the workshop Thursday and it'll be almost all experiential, not a lot of me talking. Mostly giving you tools on Thursday. So here's one way to do inquiry. Does everybody recognize that they have a deficiency story? Like on some level you believe still, on some level that you're not something enough, does everybody have something? It's okay, let's all come out of the closet and just say it. We all have something. Okay, let's work with that. Since it's so universal. The one way we work with it is to say the opposite. So let's say if the belief is that I'm not good enough and it's running my life, one way that we do inquiry is we have you say, I'm good enough. We don't have you say that for the purpose of believing that. We have you say that for the purpose of bringing up all of the unconscious material that would like to argue with that, right? So if I'm doing the inquiry and I'm saying, or my inquiry leader is saying, Scott, say that you're good enough, and instantly I feel like, no, that there's reasons why I'm not. I have proof, right? But what we do is we bring up that proof. So I want you to do that now. And I want you to notice that proof often comes in the form of words and pictures when it comes to thoughts. You see it in meditation, you see pictures, images, and then you hear words or you see words. So it's nice to know that thoughts generally come in those two categories. It simplifies inquiry and meditation because you're always going to see just those two forms of things. So what I'd like you to do is say to yourself the opposite of your deficiency story. Okay, so if the deficiency story is I'm not acknowledged, I want you to say I'm fully acknowledged, and just say it to yourself. And then I want you to watch the words and the pictures that come up from your system that try to confirm that you are actually deficient. And just raise your hand when you see them. I'm just asking you to look at thoughts, not to think them. I'm actually literally asking you to look at them, just see them. If the words are spelled out or the images, just raise your hand when you can see them. Even with your eyes open, you can see some of you. Okay? I also want you to notice that you're probably feeling something in the body, some Velcro. In other words, there's some sensation or emotion that is Velcroed or stuck to it. That's why it feels true. Does that make sense? Right? It's not totally clear down here when you're, right? Raise your hand if you feel something that feels like the body is involved in this story on some level. Okay, that's the Velcro right there. Knowing it is really important, knowing that it's there. Okay, so now pulling up the words and images that when you said the opposite, some stuff came up. Proof. Can you still see that? Yeah? All I want you to do is to continue to rest with it, just to let it be there and stay with it. And as you are, I want you to notice space around it. It's just like any image. You can see it. It's in your mind, though. You're looking at an image in your mind, but you also notice the space around it. Why is that helpful? Because space doesn't have any agenda. It's not trying to fix anything or do anything. So just noticing it around a thought, there can be a more acceptance with the thought. I also want you just to notice some space in front of the thought. Like, there's definitely the thoughts about being not good enough, but I notice some space in front of them. And just rest with it for a second. Stay looking at those words. Please don't look at me. Look at the words in the pictures. Now what I want you to do is, if you could open your eyes, I want you to take your hand like right here and just bring it in front of your eyes. And I want you to be super present to the detail of your fingers. So lines, crevices, colors, shapes. I want you to know that hand as if it's the only thing in the universe and you're aware of every detail of it. And then I want you to lift the hand off. And as you do, I want you to rest in sort of an unfocused awareness. Like your awareness is taking in the entirety of the moment, but it's not focused on anything in particular. And as you do that, I want you to breathe and feel down into the body. And now I want you to just to feel that without those thoughts on there for a moment. So those thoughts may have unhooked a little bit. I want you to be with this feeling without the thoughts and just rest with the feeling and allow it. And if you notice yourself wanting to do something with it, allow that too. But just watch and feel the feeling. It's much easier to deal with a feeling when there aren't any thoughts on it. Dealing with a feeling with thoughts on it is challenging. So now what I want you to do is come back to the reverse inquiry question, which is the opposite of your deficiency story, right? So if I'm not good enough, I'm going to say, I am good enough. Or you can even say, I'm perfect, right? And then, so say that for yourself, And let the unconscious stuff that tries to prove that you're deficient, let it come up. Rest with it. Allow it. And again, notice that it comes in words and pictures, and you can even build a collage. Like you can build up the evidence. Like here's the image of being ridiculed in 6th grade. Here's my dad's face when he was calling me worthless. Here's the words worthless. So you're actually seeing your mind from awareness. You're seeing its contents. And you're allowing that. So you're awake to your thoughts, but you're not trying to change them. You're just seeing them. And now take your hand down here, again, right in front of your eyes, and it just disrupts the focus for a second. Look at lines, textures. You don't have to do it very long, then drop the hand, come back to the unfocused awareness. And as you do that, unfocused just means wide open, almost like there's not a lot of thoughts going on. Take a breath, come down and feel, and allow that feeling or sensation, but now without those thoughts on there. You can use any breathing techniques that are helpful, as long as they're not meant to push things away. Allowing is the answer. Okay. Truth is, these are deep stories, right? So we're going to have to keep going a couple of rounds. I'm just going to give you a taste of it. You're not going to walk away without that story completely, but you're going to get a taste of a way to deal with it. So just say the opposite again. That I am perfect, or that I am acknowledged completely. And then your mind is going to give you, again, maybe some sub-files that you didn't see. It's going to give you proof. It's going to try to prove it. And all I'm asking you to do is to see the proof. See the words. See the pictures. Build up the collage. Observe the mind from awareness. And then as you do, take the hand here. I'm going to add a skill this time. Take a hand and just watch it for a second. Be very aware of it. Then take 2 fingers down like this. I want you to do some circles. And I want you to watch the fingers. You can even switch directions. Okay? Then I want you to take those 2 fingers and start tapping right here on the mind's eye. And what I want you to do, we call this rapid witnessing. So in other words, if there's anything left over out there in awareness that seems to prove your deficiency, I want you to pull it up by taking your eyes and literally seeing it and pulling it up into the tapping zone and dropping it into that tapping zone. And as soon as you drop it in there, I want you to notice the tapping for a few seconds, like you come back to presence. And then I want you to drag the next thing into the tapping zone, notice the tapping, until you run out of things, and then drop your hand. And as you drop your hand, I want you to come down into the body again, because the whole point of this work is to meet the feelings and sensations without mind. So come down, whatever might be left, may not be much left, and just feel and allow without those thoughts on there. And all the while being aware of being aware, because that's the foundation. This is not just about getting rid of suffering. This is about recognizing what we are or what we're not. We're not these stories, even though it seems like we are. So let's just go one more round of that. See what your mind has left. You know, it can be pretty inventive. You know, I always talk about there's files and then there's sub-files and then there's sub-files. So say again the opposite of your story. I'm totally lovable. If your story's unlovable, I'm totally lovable, and just watch whatever it is that still has to come up to prove that you're deficient and separate. Really see it. Don't analyze, though. Just watch. For those of you who are running out of triggers, just notice that you're resting as awareness more. Like, because your false identity got pulled out of the way for a second, so you're kind of here, awake and aware. See that? But for those who still have some things up there, let's look at them and then bring the hand down in there. Being present to the hand. And then the two fingers. I'll tell you, if you need to know where these techniques come from, talk to me afterwards. They come from various places. Just watching the fingers and then turning into tapping. It's tapping in the way that I do it is like drag and drop with the computer, because these are like files. Like they're telling you, oh, you're a loser. I watch that thought, drag that in there, notice the tapping. Brings me back to awareness. Anything left of the collage, just pull it in and then take a deep breath. Again, we're want to come down into the body, aware in the inner body, but without this content. Because the content just creates suffering. It doesn't relieve it. So I want to spend just the last few minutes with more of a meditation. If you're interested, this is just a little bit of a whole system of inquiry that we do. I've given you literally the easiest, most accessible. It's not necessarily the most effective. It's the most accessible. What I'd like you to do is take you through a short meditation, which I hope will ground you even more in the awareness. So I'd like you to close your eyes for this. And by the way, all these tools can be used regardless of whether you have addiction in your life. I mean, it's just about ending suffering and waking up and being free and happy and joyful, finally, in life. You know, that's what it's about. And it is possible. With your eyes closed, I want you to start by noticing that you're sitting as a physical being on a surface. There's gravity to that. There's a certain weightfulness of it. You're in a room with other people. But what I want you to do is, I want you to imagine that you're being sort of lifted off of your mat or your chair. You're being taken up higher and higher into the sky, literally visualizing that, what it feels like, each altitude going higher and higher. It's like you're leaving, you can look down, you can see the ashram, and you can see the earth. As you go further away from the earth, I want you to imagine that now you're actually in outer space. So it's really quiet out there. But I want you to just notice that this outer space really is really us. Because you're able to experience that spaciousness just by closing your eyes. And I want you to notice that spaciousness. Imagine that you're in outer space. And I want you to notice what forms are there. Like what thoughts or ideas are cluttering up that space right now. Just take note of them, like planets or moons or just what's in the space. Just take notice. And as you take notice, I want you to imagine that all of that is just sort of falling away. Don't push it away. Just see it as thought and just watch it like it's almost like you're in outer space and all the stars are falling away, all the forms. Everything that is a form is falling away. Everything that has boundary. But we're really doing it with thoughts, right? So as you're in that outer space, and now you're in more of a non-conceptual place, I want you to feel that as yourself. I want you to feel that space as what you are. Not as something you're experiencing, but feel it inside the head. That outer space is there, that space is there inside the head. And I want you to notice that it's inside the throat. As you bring attention there, that same space is there. And then as you bring attention down into the body, you're finding that space everywhere. And everywhere you look, yeah, there's some sensation there, sure. But even within the sensation, there's spaciousness. Space permeates every sensation if you look deeply. Feel it into your stomach, chest, pelvic area, legs, fingers. Science tells us that we're 99% space, and we don't need science because we can experience it directly. There it is. And I want you to feel what it feels like to be a being of empty, an empty being, because there's a fullness in it. It's not a bad kind of spaciousness. It's a sense of completeness. Like, it feels like it's accomplished. Like, I'm here, and that's enough. I'm content with being here. Now, what I want you to do is come back to the mat and just notice that we never left, and all we did was tap into a spaciousness that's already actually here with us. And with your eyes closed, you can notice that that spaciousness is all around you. And it's within you, in the same areas. And then I want you to open your eyes and notice that that's a little more challenging because the mind wants to come back in. See if you can just look around without concepts. So from this place, are we deficient? Don't ask the mind. Look from the awareness. Is the awareness deficient? Is there anything wrong with it? It's perfect. It's not even that. There's no concept for it. So it's just showing you that all the stuff that the mind is telling you on a daily basis is false. Because if all that stuff is so true, how can it just sort of fall away and yet we're still here as the spirit or the awakeness, right? That must be what we really are. If this stuff can fall away, yet we are still here, the awakeness. So that's the foundation, is the recognition of that awareness. And then the inquiry is how we sort of end or untangle ourselves from the suffering of the phenomena that appears in the space. So that's what I want to do Thursday with you if you want to come. We're going to do, hopefully from beginning to end, just one set of inquiry after the other so that you'll take away. I'm also going to show, I know a lot of people here love to meditate. I've got great meditation tools on the somatic level. So a lot of what we do with inquiry, just real quick, to try to entice you to come Thursday, because I think you'll like it, is what we do is we go down into feelings and sensations, and we have a way of mining, M-I-N-E, mining out unconscious material. So by asking certain directed questions that force the material out. So you know how I say the issues in our tissues, right? What we're doing is we're going down with inquiry, in awareness, to the tissues, to the sensations, and we're asking questions that pull out unconscious material that's actually driving you in your life. So you ever wonder why you do a certain thing, or like why you don't like that, or you do like this, or you feel like you can connect with these people but not these people, or that's all in here. It's not just in the mind, it's being carried and stored down here. So we have ways of that you can actually use in meditation to pull that stuff out. And I'll just tell you that if you don't, it's not going to go away. And it's going to continue to create suffering until it's one of the unfortunate or great things about life, is that the awakening has to come all the way down. It can't just be a sort of, I'm living in the present moment. It has to come all the way down so that everything that you've stored, everything that's happened to you, this life and past lives, whatever you believe, is freed up. That's really what liberation, I feel, is. Liberation is a later realization that happens as you go all the way down, you know. So anyway, I hope that made sense. And if it didn't, come talk to me, because maybe I can break it down even. But I know a lot of people did resonate with, because you're already on the path. I've met you. I've watched you guys. I mean, you're serious devotees to this thing. So a lot of you did resonate. But if anybody didn't, or is confused, or just come talk to me. Like, I'm walking a lot around here. Don't ever think that you're ever like bothering me. Just come talk to me, because I like to talk about this subject and I love helping people with it. Thank you for having me.